That was the now new Labour leader who's going to be Prime Minister within a matter of days. We'll be speaking to one of his closest allies, Debbie Abrahams, in just a second. But let's get a little bit of background from Steven Swinford, political editor of The Times first. Good afternoon, Stephen.
Good afternoon, Cathy.
I said a little bit facetiously in my opening that it was an English graduate speech. I mean, I am an English graduate myself, as is Andy Burnham. So it was the kind of speech that was, it was very well written, it was very well delivered, well communicated. But did it amount to any more than that in terms of the nuts and bolts of what he's going to do?
I think it was a very broad kind of vibes-based speech. It was all optimism and hope. Talking about a different way of doing things. I think he called it the biggest change moment for 40 years. We will have to wait a little longer for him to spell out what that change looks like and means. So the plan next week is a policy blitz on multiple fronts, particularly on the cost of living. We're hearing cuts to energy bills, things like that are going to be announced. And in several other areas, they want to kind of public control of utilities. We'll be hearing more on that. We'll be hearing about free bus fares for young people. So that's all, we will get some substance next week. I think what we will also get is the rhetoric and the language of today starting to hit reality. So let's take one of the central things he said there. He said, I want to end the insidious briefing wars that are going on in Parliament and Westminster, which he looks genuinely disgusted by. But I can tell you, a lot of those briefing wars have been fueled by his refusal to set out any members of his top team. That has led to an incredibly bitter briefing campaign against Ed Miliband, an attempt to stop him from becoming Chancellor. We have splashed the paper today on a counter-reaction from the Labour left to the prospect of Shabana Mahmood becoming Chancellor. So those factions remain, and at this stage, Andy Burnham is all-powerful, he is all things to all people, but the moment he makes those appointments next week, that starts to change.
Well, I want to talk about how bold you think he might be in just a second, but let's stay on the appointments for now, because he did say, he hasn't made any decisions about his cabinet, which is obviously news to readers of papers like The Times and the FT, who are getting, heavy briefings. So are we still expecting it to be Shabana Mahmood for Chancellor? And what does that signify for the unity of the party and the direction in terms of all the sort of tax rises that have been sort of hinted at by aides to or allies of Andy Burnham?
So we are still expecting that. That is what senior people around Burnham are telling us, that Shabana Mahmood is likely to be the Chancellor and that Ed Miliband hasn't got it. Unfortunately for Ed Miliband, it is because of the perceived negatives of having him as Chancellor that are the reason that he's being talked down for the role. So particularly he's a divisive figure, they say. He is someone that will be a lightning rod of criticism of the government. His views on new oil and gas licences in the North Sea are incompatible with those with Andy Burnham's. Some of the briefing has been really vitriolic. People have said to me he would pose a danger to the country if he became Chancellor, which is obviously pretty hyperbolic stuff. There are a list of reasons, quite a long list, why they are not going for Ed Miliband. And in terms of Shabana Mahmood, she's the great unknown. I mean, we know what she's done in the Home Office. We know she's prepared to do unpopular things if she thinks they're the right things, like on migration. Unpopular with colleagues, I mean by that, possibly not with the broader country. But at the same time, there is virtually nothing on record about her views on the economy. There is a gap there. So I'm not sure what Burnham thinks he's getting, but she, at the same time, is a very robust character, very forthright. And I could see potential trouble down the line if the government ends up going in a direction that she doesn't agree with. She's got a really astute political brain, will see round the corners, and is not prepared to kick up a fuss if she thinks it's necessary, as Keir Starmer discovered to his loss.
And it was interesting because there was no mention of foreign or defence policy, which is obviously one of the key things that the new Prime Minister will have to deal with. What did you read into that? And allied to that, the people he thanked in the audience?
I think the gap on defence is really big. I mean, the defence problem is a money problem, right? It's inextricably linked to the economy. He will need to find 15 billion quid extra for defence. That is one of Keir Starmer's legacies. He's set out plans to increase it by 15 billion, and the money will need to be determined at a later date at the next budget. So we're looking at tax rises or cuts, queued tax rises, I imagine. He'll also need loads more money for all of his different pledges. So they are going to have to raise serious sums of money come the autumn. So at this stage, you can say lots of things about public control of utilities, about building loads of council houses, all that kind of stuff. But these things cost money, and they will have to find that money from somewhere. And the backdrop to this is obviously what is going on in Iran. Once again, the ceasefire seems to have fallen apart. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed to shipping, and that's a massive economic problem coming down the line that he's got to confront. So you're going to get all of this optimism, all of these vibes, all of these visions, like clashing with a geopolitical and economic reality of what is happening on the broader world stage.
Well, Stephen, Big Ben tolling behind you reminds me you've got to go off and write your copy. I look forward to reading it in tomorrow's paper. Thanks very much, Stephen.
Thank you, Cathy.
Well, let's turn now to Debbie Abrahams, who's Labour MP, Chair of the Work and Pensions Committee, and a former PPS to Andy Burnham, who's on the line now. Good afternoon, Debbie.
Oh, hello, Cathy. How are you?
Good, thank you. I'd love to know how you viewed the speech. He talks about the last chance to change and how a generation of politicians have failed to challenge a political culture and an economic model that simply doesn't work well enough for ordinary people. So how bold do you expect him to be?
I think he will be a breath of fresh air when he takes up the mantle on Monday. I think Stephen was very fair in terms of what he said. This was a broad brush but important speech setting out Andy's vision and his values, which are quite different and quite stark. So about the importance of unity, about the importance of power, not just being held in the hands of a few people, that it needs to be about the whole country and how he wants to manage that and how he wants to deliver that for people on the ground.
But Debbie, when you're talking about unity there, I've also got to quote back at you what Stephen was saying about all the briefing that's been going on about his cabinet, and he said he hasn't chosen any of them yet, but we do expect Shabana Mahmood to be Chancellor. There was briefing against Ed Miliband. Now there's a whole load of briefing against Shabana Mahmood. I mean, do you think she would be a divisive figure given what she's done on immigration and the kind of way in which that has been viewed by quite a few in the Labour Party?
I'm not going to comment on individuals. I'm very fortunate because of the work that I have tried to do, which is over the last 15, 16 years, which is about working with people, whether that's in my own party or also across parties through the Work and Pensions Select Committee work that I do, but also in the APPG for dementia, on compassionate politics, which is about bringing people together and working together on areas that we can agree with. So I think that is very much about what Andy is trying to say here.
Okay,
we need to recognise that our leadership has been very divisive. That has filtered through to our communities and to the public as a whole. They see how we behave, the values and behaviours, as I say, that politicians, leaders have delivered to them, and that has been reflected in the angst that we have seen in the country as a whole. And it's right that he should set out that this has to stop and we need to change.
Okay,
Can I just mention in terms of the briefings as well?
Yeah.
If you thinking about, for example, there was a briefing I think just the other day on Wednesday about the increase in the state pension age. That hasn't come from anybody in Parliament. So people need to also recognise, and that includes journalists, I'm afraid, that they need to take responsibility as well. You cannot put things out which are absolutely untrue in the way that some journalists have.
Yeah, but the FT's not going to run a story tipping Shabana Mahmood for Chancellor if they haven't checked that out and gone to their sources, likewise the Times, on all of its journalism. But I just, coming back to your point about unity and bringing people together, he has made clear that he will spend political capital on reforming social care, but successive generations of politicians have tried to do that. I wonder if you think now, because so much time has gone past, it's so clear that there is a massive problem there, that people might stomach tax rises for that purpose if he can sell it to the public. Do you think that's doable?
I think he's probably going to be very sensible and wait for Baroness Casey to respond in full to her inquiry. He's always maintained that he wants to see a national care service in the same way that we have a national health service. They are very different cultures at the moment, and we need to look about bringing those together, but also the issues around how, as you rightly say, we need to pay for that. But he's always had that commitment.
Yeah, and in the past he suggested a 10% levy on people's estates, which was then dubbed a death tax. Do you think he has
That was 15, 16 years ago, I think.
Yeah, but you still got to find the money, though, haven't you?
You're talking about a different economic context. You're also, we mustn't forget about the review that was done, I think, in 2014-15, and suggested approaches to payment at that stage, which was agreed to before the election in 2015, and then it was unfortunately shelved by the previous Conservative government.
But it is the problem of money, isn't it? And, we're in a no more benign economic climate now than we were then. The Labour MPs refused to stomach welfare cuts that were put forward by the previous Prime Minister. He talks about being a pro-business leader, Andy Burnham, but then there's the sort of prospect of wealth taxes, this land value tax that keeps coming back and suggested by people around him. Do you think those are as politically controversial as they ever were, or do you think he should have the courage to make those decisions, which may be unpopular with some people?
Again, I think in his speech he referenced, and I should put a caveat to this, Cathy, that I don't know any of the specific details in terms of the plans that he's thinking. I'm only anticipating where he might be going, and then my that's my analysis, and it could be as incorrect as some of the people that you have been briefed by, but. As far as making sure that income, wealth and power and the inequalities that we've seen over decades are addressed, that is very much where Andy is coming from. How he does it is a different matter. But he's absolutely clear in his speech that he wants to change politics, not just in terms of what we do, but how we do it. And how we do it for the benefit of the public as a whole. We need to be community leaders and reflect that in our behaviour for the country as a whole.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because
what we do also needs to reflect that. And you've mentioned the care service and what we need to be doing around that. There are loads of other ways as well. Devolution, for example, and how we develop policy. I have always been very keen around the case of citizens' assemblies on major fiscal events or major policies, so that we can get consensus across the country in terms of how we take this forward. The other important thing, which obviously has been delivered so ably in Greater Manchester, is about ensuring every area can grow. Greater Manchester now growing at twice the rate of the country as a whole. That wasn't the case 15 years ago. It really has been a difference.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, I'm asking you questions about, various proposals that have been floated, and, you're rightly saying, well, you don't know what is in his mind. I don't know what's in his mind. And part of the problem is we haven't had the opportunity to scrutinise him that much, and Parliament hasn't had the opportunity to do that either. Is there an argument for Parliament being recalled to do that? It seems like a fair point, doesn't it?
So he's also been very clear, as he was at Makerfield, that we have a manifesto that we have committed to and that he is committed to. So we'll
but he's talking about He's talking about the biggest change in 40 years, without going to the country to ask to set that out. We don't know what it is.
Again, I repeat, he has said that he will do this under the parameters of the general election manifesto of 2024. That's only right.
But how is that the biggest change in 40 years then?
Well, because in terms of how we deliver things, Cathy, so we promised, and we started to be fair to Keir, and I would like to acknowledge the work that he has done and the foundations that he has set out. As Andy did at the beginning of his speech. He's made a huge difference, both domestically but also internationally.
Right. No mention of foreign policy, though, in that speech. Not a sausage.
But you'll be very clear about the statement he made last week around that we haven't done well enough around Palestine and Israel. And if you understand the politics of the Middle East, if you get that right, the rest of the region stands a chance. But we haven't done what we should have done as far as Palestine and Israel.
OK, Debbie, thanks very much for joining us with that. Debbie Abrahams there, who's chair of Work and Pensions Committee, a close ally of Andy Burnham. Lots of messages coming in, a lot of scepticism, I think it's fair to say, from Times Radio listeners. Sherry says, so he's ready but doesn't yet know who his Chancellor will be, so he's not ready. Kevin saying 2024, 2025 and again now in 2026 we're going to have a summer of economic speculation acting as a brake on growth. Don't they ever learn? And Kevin, we're going to be talking to business people and representatives about just those very questions in a second. Lisa says, seriously, we were supposed to believe that the person about to take over the reins hasn't decided who will be in his cabinet. What's the plan? A sit down with a cuppa and a notepad over the weekend? Well, Lisa, I'm sure he's got a well-worked plan up and running and we'll just wait to hear about it. Let's see what comes forward.